My husband's casket had barely touched the wet earth when my mother-in-law leaned close to my ear. "He isn't even cold, and you are smiling." Patricia hissed, "Enjoy it. The house and the company belong to me now." She expected me to crumble. She wanted a screaming match right there in the middle of the cemetery. Instead, I kept my eyes fixed on the polished oak coffin. I offered her absolutely no tears and no apologies, just a very slight, deliberate smile. Because I already knew exactly what was hidden under the shop floor. The silence inside our historic coastal mansion was absolute. I stood in the foyer, dripping wet from the cemetery rain, and slowly took off my black coat. There were no guests. I had asked Marcus, our trust attorney, to ensure the reception was held elsewhere. I needed the quiet. I needed to breathe the salt air drifting through the open veranda doors without Patricia's suffocating perfume lingering in the hallways. My mother-in-law had mistaken my expression at the graveside for madness. She assumed grief had finally broken my composure. Patricia always underestimated me. She saw my silence as weakness. She saw my lack of tears as a lack of love. She could not have been more wrong. I walked into Jonathan's study. The scent of aged leather and drafting graphite still hung in the air. I walked behind his heavy mahogany desk and opened the top drawer. Inside sat a single sealed envelope. Marcus had handed it to me in private the night before the funeral. I had opened it under the dim light of a single desk lamp, my hands completely steady. Jonathan had always been a man of precision. He restored centuries-old architecture. He knew how to secure foundations against hurricanes. He also knew his mother. He knew Patricia would not wait a single day before attempting to seize our life's work. Our company was not just a workshop. It was a $4.5 million enterprise. The letter inside the envelope was short. It was written in Jonathan's elegant, architect-style handwriting. He did not write about his illness. He did not write about the end. He only wrote one specific, deliberate sentence. Oak always keeps what paper might lose. It was a code, a private language we had shared since our early days working in a cramped garage. Patricia thought she was walking into an easy victory. She believed she was about to inherit an empire simply because she shared his bloodline. She did not know that my husband had spent his final months preparing a fortress. I folded the letter carefully. I slipped it into my pocket. I looked around the room we had built together, taking in every detail. I looked at the blueprints scattered across his drafting table. The Charleston Preservation Society trusted us with their most valuable historic assets. We did not just fix old houses, we resurrected history. That reputation was worth millions. Patricia did not care about the history. She did not care about the craft. She only cared about the liquidation value. She saw our legacy as nothing more than a real estate transaction. She believed she could simply erase me. She had spent 15 years treating me like a temporary guest in Jonathan's life. Now that he was gone, she thought the guest was finally being evicted. But Jonathan's letter proved otherwise. He had left me a map. A clear, undeniable path to protect everything we had built. I traced my fingers over the edge of the mahogany desk. I did not feel fear. I did not feel panic. I felt a cold, deep clarity settling into my bones. I knew what it meant. I did not take a week off to mourn. The morning after the funeral, I drove straight to the restoration shop, the familiar smell of sawdust, varnish, and strong coffee wrapped around me like a shield. The shop floor was a cathedral of industry. Saws hummed, hammers echoed. This was my sanctuary. I walked past the rows of antique heart pine planks waiting to be restored. I kept my posture straight. My team needed to see that the foundation of this company had not cracked. But as I walked toward my glass-walled office, my eyes caught a specific corner of the floorboards. My mind pulled me back to 7 weeks ago. Jonathan had just been transferred to the intensive care unit. The doctors had hooked him up to a maze of monitors. The steady, terrifying beep of the machines was the only sound in his room. I had driven back to the shop that afternoon, only to retrieve our corporate health insurance documents for the hospital administration. I parked my car in the alley behind the lumber yard. As I walked toward the side entrance, I stopped dead in my tracks. Patricia was standing in the middle of the main workshop. She was not alone. She had brought 3 men in tailored, expensive suits. They did not look like architects. They did not look like historical preservationists. They looked like liquidators. I stood hidden behind a stack of reclaimed timber and watched. Patricia was pointing at the heavy machinery. She gestured toward the waterfront access at the back of our property. She was leading a tour. She was pricing the $4.5 million property while her son was fighting for his life across town. I watched one of the men take notes on a tablet. He pointed at the roof. Patricia nodded eagerly. She did not care about the master craftsmen working around her. She did not care about the ongoing projects. She only saw the cash value of the land underneath our feet. She was negotiating the dismantling of our lives before Jonathan's heart had even stopped beating. I did not confront her that day. I did not step out from the shadows and scream. I simply turned around, walked back to my car, and drove back to the hospital. I sat next to Jonathan's bed and held his hand. I never told him what I saw. He was already fighting a war inside his own body. He did not need to fight his mother's greed. But standing in the shop now, looking at that exact spot on the floor, the memory crystallized in my mind. I walked into my office and closed the door. The sound of the machinery faded into a low hum. I booted up my computer and looked at our operational dashboard. 34 families depended on this company for their livelihood. 34 mortgages, tuition payments, and grocery bills. Patricia wanted to sell the ground right out from under them. She wanted to hand over our life's work to a corporate developer who would raze the historic warehouse and build luxury condos. She thought I was just a grieving widow too blinded by sorrow to see the vultures circling. She thought I would step aside quietly to avoid a legal conflict. She was relying on my desire for peace. She had no idea what was coming. She had planned it all. Before I could even review the morning emails, a timid knock sounded on my office glass. I looked up. It was Tess. Tess was 30 years old, a brilliant Finnish carpenter, and a single mother. Her hands were always covered in calluses and wood stain. Normally, she carried a bright, unstoppable energy. Today, she looked absolutely terrified. Her face was pale, and she was gripping a piece of sandpaper so tightly her knuckles were white. I stood up immediately and opened the door. Tess, come in. Sit down. She sat on the edge of the leather chair, trembling slightly. Amanda, I am so sorry to bother you today. I know it is the worst possible time, but I just got a call from the specialty pharmacy. My chest tightened. Tess's son, Sam, suffered from a chronic, severe respiratory illness. Our company provided a premium, high-tier health insurance package specifically because we knew our team needed real protection. Sam relied on that coverage for his monthly treatments. Without it, his condition would deteriorate rapidly. What did the pharmacy say? I asked, keeping my voice entirely level. They said our corporate insurance account is frozen, Tess whispered, a tear finally escaping her eye. They cannot process Sam's medication. They said the policy is under administrative review due to a change in ownership. A cold spike of pure anger drove straight through my heart. I reached for my desk phone. Give me 5 minutes. I dialed our corporate insurance broker. I bypassed the receptionist and demanded the senior agent. When he answered, he sounded deeply uncomfortable. I did not raise my voice. I simply asked for the truth. Amanda, the broker said slowly, we received a call yesterday from a Patricia Harper. She identified herself as the new controlling owner of the estate. She requested a full roster reduction. She said she was cleaning up the books to prepare for a corporate buyout and instructed us to halt all premium policies. Patricia had not even waited for the probate courts to open. She was moving with ruthless speed, using her last name to bulldoze her way into our accounts. She was actively trying to strip my team of their lifelines just to make the financial spreadsheets look more attractive to her corporate buyers. The account is not changing hands, I told the broker, my tone dropping to a dangerous calm. Unfreeze it immediately. If there is a delay, I will wire the premium from my personal account by noon. I hung up the phone. I looked at Tess. I pulled my personal credit card from my wallet and handed it to her. Call the pharmacy. Use this to cover Sam's medication today. The corporate account will be restored by tomorrow morning. Do not worry about this ever again. Tess stared at the card, her lips parting in shock. Amanda, this is $2,500. Make the call. Tess, I said softly. I watched her walk out of my office. My silent grief was gone. Patricia had crossed the line. Charleston High Society is a small, insulated world. Whispers travel faster than the ocean breeze. For 15 years. I knew exactly what Patricia told her country club friends about me. She painted a very specific masterpiece of fiction. In her narrative, Jonathan was the solitary architectural genius who built an empire with his bare hands. And I was simply the lucky woman who had managed to marry him. The pretty wife who enjoyed the profits, the outsider who had contributed nothing but a signature on a marriage license. Patricia loved playing the proud mother of a self-made millionaire. She actively erased me from the history of our company. I never corrected the rumours. I never defended myself at her lavish dinner parties. I let her have her delusions because Jonathan hated conflict, and I loved Jonathan. But the reality of our history was documented in ink and bank stamps. 12 years ago, this company was nothing more than a failing dream. Jonathan had the hands of a master artist, but he had no concept of business. He could spend 400 hours restoring a single staircase, completely ignoring the fact that we had no money to pay the electric bill. We were drowning. We were weeks away from total bankruptcy. Patricia did not help us. When Jonathan asked her for a short-term loan to save the shop, she refused. She told him to abandon his little hobby and get a real job at a corporate firm. So, I stepped in. I owned a small, premarital condo downtown. I went to the bank by myself. I signed the papers and mortgaged my only asset for $85,000. I took every penny of that money and injected it into the restoration shop. I used that cash to pay the salaries of our first 6 carpenters. I kept the lights on. But more importantly, I took over the operations, I designed the logistics software, I built the quality control protocols that allowed us to scale. I negotiated the massive commercial contracts that Jonathan was too polite to demand. He was the soul of the work, but I built the skeleton that held it up. I transformed an artist's bleeding hobby into a $4.5 million industry leader. The patents for our specialised wood preservation techniques were filed because I forced us to document the processes. Patricia knew all of this. She knew I had risked everything. She knew I had saved her son from financial ruin. But she deliberately chose to ignore it, preferring a lie where she was the matriarch of a dynasty and I was merely a parasite. Now, she was trying to steal the very house I had built to pay her own debts. She thought I was a soft target. She thought I would walk away. I built this empire too. People often ask why a smart, capable woman tolerates blatant disrespect from her in-laws for 15 years. They wonder why I never raised my voice, why I never slammed a door, why I let Patricia erase my contributions at her elegant dinner parties. The answer is not weakness. The answer is the slow, silent trap of normalization. When you love someone who is caught in the middle, you make concessions. Jonathan hated conflict. He possessed the soul of an artist and the gentle heart of a peacemaker. Every time Patricia made a cutting remark about my background, Jonathan would look at me with silent, pleading eyes. He was begging for peace. And because I loved him, I gave it to him. I absorbed the toxicity so he would not have to. Patricia maintained her control over Jonathan through a very specific narrative of martyrdom. She constantly reminded him of a $100,000 sacrifice she claimed to have made for his early education and career setup. She brought it up at holidays. She brought it up during business milestones. It was a phantom debt, hanging over our lives like a dark cloud. Years ago, when the company finally became highly profitable, I tried to end it. I sat in Jonathan's office and showed him the financial projections. I told him we had enough liquid capital to simply write Patricia a check. Let's just give her the $100,000, I had said, sliding the printed ledger across his desk. Let's give her double. If it makes her feel respected, let's pay the debt and buy our peace of mind. Jonathan had looked at the numbers for a long time. Then he slowly pushed the paper back to me. It won't work. Amanda, it is not about the money. If I write that check, she loses her leverage. She doesn't want cash. She wants absolute control. He was right. Paying her off would have only offended her, because it would have severed the invisible leash she kept around his neck. So, the debt remained unpaid. The comments continued. The disrespect was normalised, woven into the fabric of our family dynamic. I accepted my role as the silent, unappreciated wife to protect my husband's fragile peace. I smiled through the insults. I bit my tongue during the holidays. I thought my silence was a shield protecting our marriage. I did not realise it was giving Patricia the false confidence that I was a pushover. She genuinely believed that, because I never fought back over the dinner table. I would not fight back over the company. She mistook my chosen restraint for inherent submissiveness. She assumed that without Jonathan to act as a buffer, I would simply fold under her pressure and walk away from a $4.5 million empire. She had spent 15 years studying a version of me that I had manufactured specifically to keep the peace. Now, the peace was over. I paid the real price. I was sitting in my office, reviewing the reinstated insurance policy for Tess, when someone knocked on the glass. It was Tess again. This time, she did not look terrified. She looked deeply thoughtful. She walked in and sat down without being asked. Her hands were covered in fresh sawdust from the milling machines. "Amanda," she started, her voice low. "When I was dealing with the pharmacy earlier, I remembered something Mr. Jonathan said a few months ago. I didn't think much of it at the time. He was always particular about the wood." I closed my laptop. "Tell me." "It was back in October, right before his diagnosis got worse," Tess explained, her eyes focusing on the grain of my desk. We were replacing some of the old floorboards in the back corner of the shop, the area near the heavy planer. I had my pneumatic nail gun ready to secure a heavy plank of reclaimed oak. She paused, taking a breath. He walked over and actually put his hand over the barrel of the nail gun. He was very calm, but very serious. He looked down at the oak board, then looked at me. He said, "Don't nail this one, Tess. Leave it loose. Someday. Amanda will understand why." My heart skipped a single beat. I kept my face completely neutral, but my mind was racing. Oak always keeps what paper might lose. The sentence from his final letter echoed in my ears. It was not a metaphor. It was literal instructions. Jonathan had physically prepared a safe hold inside the very foundation of the company. He had entrusted the location to Tess, knowing she was meticulous and loyal, without burdening her with the actual secret. "Did you secure it?" I asked quietly. "No," Tess shook her head. I used a tight friction fit. It looks flush with the rest of the floor, but if you know where to apply pressure, it lifts right out. I haven't touched it since that day. Nobody has. I nodded slowly. The shop floor was heavily trafficked during the day. Patricia's liquidators had likely walked right over it without noticing a thing. Jonathan had hidden his ultimate contingency plan in plain sight, protected only by the craftsmanship he had dedicated his life to. "Thank you, Tess," I said. "Please don't mention this to anyone else. Not a single word." "I won't," she promised. Standing up, I looked out the glass window of my office toward the back of the shop. I could hear the heavy planer running. I knew exactly where that board was, but I could not go to it now. Not in broad daylight. Not with the crew walking around. I needed absolute privacy to retrieve whatever Jonathan had left for me. We just had to wait. By Wednesday afternoon, Patricia decided it was time to drop the formalities. She did not call to make an appointment. She simply walked into the restoration shop like she already owned the deed. She wore a pristine white designer coat and carried a handbag that cost more than most of my carpenters made in a month. But, as she stood in the centre of the dusty workshop, I noticed the small details. Her posture was rigidly tight. The pristine coat was from 3 seasons ago. The confidence in her eyes was slightly hollow, replaced by a frantic, nervous energy she was trying hard to conceal. I walked out of my office to meet her. I did not offer a greeting. "Amanda," she said, her voice projecting across the room so the workers could hear. "I need the master keys to the facility. And the alarm codes. The buyers require full access by Friday morning to conduct their environmental survey." She was speaking to me like a disgruntled property manager talking to a rogue tenant. "The facility is not for sale," I replied, keeping my tone entirely conversational. "There are no buyers." Patricia let out a sharp, condescending laugh. "Do not play games with me right now. You know exactly what the law says about a mother's rights to an interstate estate. I am sparing you the humiliation of an eviction. Give me the keys." I knew what she didn't know I knew. Marcus, our attorney, had run a quiet background check on Patricia's financial holdings the moment she made her threat at the cemetery. The results were staggering. Patricia was not a wealthy matriarch. She was a master of financial illusion. Her historic home in the city was double mortgaged to the absolute limit. She had lost heavily in a series of disastrous private investments 2 years prior. She owed massive property tax arrears. She had been maintaining her country club lifestyle on high-interest credit lines. She wasn't trying to sell our company out of spite. She was trying to sell it out of pure, desperate survival. She had already promised the millions from this liquidation to her creditors. She was counting on Jonathan's death to balance her own catastrophic ledgers. I looked at her expensive handbag. I looked at the slight tremor in her manicured hand. I felt absolutely no pity. She was willing to destroy 34 families, cut off medical insurance for a sick child, and bulldoze her son's legacy just to keep up appearances at her weekly luncheons. "I will not give you the keys." "Patricia," I said softly. Her face flushed with sudden, genuine rage. "You arrogant little gold digger! I will have the court remove you by force." She spun on her heels and marched out of the shop. The heavy metal door slammed shut behind her. She was completely broke. The mistake Patricia made was assuming our company was still running on outdated, manual systems. She forgot that I was the one who built the digital infrastructure. I controlled the routing, the firewalls, and the administrative servers. Late Thursday evening, my computer pinged with an intercepted email. It was an automated forward from an old generic info address Patricia had mistakenly used while communicating with her buyers. The sender was a senior acquisitions partner at a major commercial real estate firm. The subject line read, "Draft liquidation terms, Harper Property." I opened the attached PDF document. It was a cold, clinical spreadsheet breaking down the $4.5 million value of our company. It listed the acreage. It listed the estimated auction value of our heavy machinery. And then there was the third tab, Personnel Severance Matrix. I scrolled through the list of 34 names. These were men and women who had stood by us when we could barely make payroll. They were craftsmen who had dedicated their lives to preservation. Patricia and her corporate buyers had reduced them to line items. The matrix detailed exactly how little they legally had to pay out upon immediate termination. The buyers required the property to be delivered completely vacant. No employees, no legacy contracts, no obligations. My eyes stopped on row 14. Tess's name was listed there. But unlike the others, her row was highlighted, and a digital red circle was drawn around her employee identification number. In the margin, the real estate executive had left a blunt, typed note for Patricia. High insurance costs due to dependent medical needs. Terminate first to avoid COBRA liability rollover. I stared at the screen. The air in my office felt suddenly freezing. This was not just business. This was targeted cruelty. They had looked at our corporate insurance ledger, identified a mother fighting for her child's life, and marked her as a financial liability to be eliminated on day one. Patricia had agreed to this. She had probably suggested it. I did not cry. I did not throw my coffee mug against the glass wall. The anger I felt was far too profound for a physical outburst. It bypassed rage and settled into a cold, absolute resolve. Patricia was not just insulting me, she was actively trying to ruin the innocent people I was responsible for protecting. I printed the spreadsheet, I folded it and placed it inside my leather portfolio. I locked my computer and turned off the office lights. The time for silent endurance had officially expired. I walked out of my office and stood in the centre of the dark, quiet workshop. The moonlight spilled through the high windows, illuminating the heavy saws and workbenches. I thought about the 12 years of sweat and sacrifice. I thought about the second mortgage I took out to buy the very machines Patricia now planned to auction off. She wanted to fight. She thought she was fighting a grieving, passive widow who would shrink under the weight of legal threats and high-priced attorneys. She had no idea she was stepping into an arena with the person who actually built the fortress. I checked my watch. It was almost midnight. The shop was empty. The perimeter alarm was set. It was finally time to retrieve the secret Jonathan had left behind. I prepared for war. Before I could retrieve Jonathan's hidden documents, Patricia escalated her attack. Desperation makes people reckless. When she realised I was not going to hand over the keys voluntarily, she decided she needed a weapon to force my removal. She needed a witness. On Friday morning. Tess walked into my office. Her face was an unreadable mask of stress. She closed the blinds to the shop floor before sitting down. "Amanda," she said, her voice tight, "your mother-in-law cornered me in the parking lot of the pharmacy last night." I felt my spine stiffen. "What did she say to you?" "She wasn't yelling," Tess explained. "She was acting overly sweet. She told me she knew about Sam's medical bills. She told me she knew the corporate insurance was expensive and that I must be terrified of losing my job." Patricia had done her homework. She had identified the most vulnerable person in my crew and decided to exploit a mother's deepest fear. She handed me a thick envelope, Tess continued, looking down at her hands. She said it was $10,000 in cash, enough to cover Sam's specialised treatments for almost a year if I lost my insurance. "And what did she want in return?" I asked calmly. Tess reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a folded legal document. She placed it on my desk. "She wanted me to sign this sworn affidavit. She said her lawyers drafted it." I opened the document. It was a masterpiece of fabricated fiction. It stated that as an employee who worked closely with Jonathan, Tess had witnessed me emotionally abusing him. It claimed I had isolated him from his family, controlled his communications, and forced him to sign financial documents while he was heavily medicated. It was designed to prove undue influence. The exact legal mechanism Patricia needed to bypass standard probate and seize control of the estate. She told me that if I signed it, I could keep the money, and she would personally write me a glowing letter of recommendation for when the company is liquidated. Tess said. I looked at Tess. A single mother, struggling with medical debt, handed $10,000 in cash in a dark parking lot. It was an impossible test of loyalty. What did you tell her? I asked. Tess looked me directly in the eyes. Her posture was proud. I told her that my son needs medicine, but he also needs a mother who isn't a liar. I told her that if you were a gold digger, you wouldn't have sold your own mother's engagement ring 12 years ago to make sure I got my Christmas bonus. Tess had shoved the envelope of cash back into Patricia's chest and walked away. I reached across the desk and took Tess's hand. I didn't need to say thank you. The understanding between us was absolute. Patricia had tried to buy loyalty with dirty money, completely failing to realise that true loyalty is built on shared sacrifice. She picked the wrong mother. Word of Patricia's parking lot encounter with Tess did not stay a secret. In a workshop of 34 craftsmen, loyalty is a tight, woven fabric. By Monday morning, the atmosphere on the shop floor had shifted. The usual background banter over the loud hum of the planers and sanders was gone. A heavy, protective silence had settled over the building. When Patricia arrived unannounced just before noon, expecting to walk through the aisles like a newly crowned queen, she was met with an invisible wall. Usually, our master carpenters would offer a polite nod or a "Good morning, Mrs. Harper." Today, nobody looked up. When she walked past the finishing stations, the workers seamlessly turned their backs, focusing intensely on their sanding blocks. When she asked one of the junior apprentices to fetch her a cup of coffee, the young man simply pointed to the break room and walked away. They did not strike, they did not shout, they simply erased her authority by refusing to acknowledge it. I watched this from my glass office. I felt a profound, quiet pride. Patricia had spent 15 years treating these people like disposable machinery. She had called them blue-collar help at her elegant dinner parties. She failed to understand that these men and women were artists. They possessed a quiet, immense dignity. They knew Patricia wanted to sell their livelihoods to the highest bidder, and they were drawing their own boundary. But I also knew their silent rebellion would only make Patricia more dangerous. She could not tolerate being ignored. She would try to hurt them through the payroll accounts, exactly as she had tried to hurt Tess through the health insurance. I opened my private banking portal. I had a separate personal emergency fund that I had quietly built over the last decade. It was the money I had earned from selling my premarital condo, carefully invested and untouched. I initiated a secure transfer, moving enough liquid capital into a shadow payroll account to cover the salaries of all 34 employees for the next 3 months. If Patricia managed to convince a judge to freeze our corporate assets during a probate dispute, my team would not miss a single paycheck. They would not lose their homes. They would not lose their medical coverage. Patricia thought she could starve us out. She thought she controlled the oxygen in the room. She was completely unaware that I had already built an independent life support system for my people. I looked down at the confirmed transfer receipt on my screen. I closed the banking portal and walked out onto the shop floor. The moment I stepped out of my office, the tension in the room seemed to ease. The foreman, an older man named Harold, who had worked with Jonathan for 20 years, caught my eye. He gave me a single, firm nod. I nodded back. No words were needed. Patricia stood near the loading dock, looking furious and entirely out of place in her expensive white coat. She was glaring at the workers, her hands clenched into fists. She was a woman who demanded absolute compliance, and she was drowning in a sea of silent defiance. I did not approach her. I did not give her the satisfaction of a confrontation. I simply walked over to Tess's workstation, inspected the grain of a restored oak panel, and approved the finish. They were fully protected. Every fortress has a weak point. I had secured the heavy machinery, protected the payroll, and guarded the operational patents. But I could not control human desperation. Colin was our interim chief financial officer. He was a brilliant numbers man, but he possessed the nervous, calculating energy of someone who always wanted to be on the winning side. He had only been with us for 2 years. He did not have the deep ingrained loyalty of the craftsman on the shop floor. To Colin, the company was just a stepping stone on his resume. When Patricia started parading corporate liquidators through our halls, Colin panicked. He saw the expensive suits. He heard the casual talk of multi-million-dollar buyouts. He looked at me, a grieving widow refusing to fight in public. And he made a calculated assumption. He assumed I was going to lose. So, Colin decided to secure his own future. I did not know it at the time, but Colin had been quietly meeting with Patricia at her country club. He offered her a very specific, highly illegal service. He agreed to bypass my administrative firewalls and provide her with our most sensitive corporate data. Over the course of 3 days, Colin downloaded our proprietary client lists. He exported the detailed valuation reports of our specialised restoration machinery. He copied our active vendor contracts and our long-term insurance policies. He handed Patricia the exact financial blueprint she needed to convince her corporate buyers that the acquisition would be a massive, risk-free windfall. In exchange, Patricia made him a grand, sweeping promise. She told him that once the corporate developers took over, they would need an experienced vice president of finance to oversee the regional liquidation. She promised him a massive salary bump, a lucrative severance package, and a seat at the executive table. Colin believed her. He believed a woman who was actively trying to bankrupt her own son's legacy. He traded his professional ethics for a phantom promotion, handing our corporate secrets over in unmarked manila envelopes over expensive lunches. He thought he was being incredibly clever. He thought he was playing a sophisticated game of corporate chess, aligning himself with the inevitable victor. He had no idea he was dealing with a woman who viewed everyone around her as entirely disposable. I only pieced the timeline of his betrayal together much later. I had noticed Colin acting strangely during our morning briefings. He avoided making eye contact. He was constantly checking his phone under the conference table. When I asked him for standard budgetary reports, he provided vague, evasive summaries. I should have locked him out of the main server immediately. But grief is a heavy anchor, and my focus was entirely on protecting the craftsman and securing the medical benefits for Tess's son. I assumed Colin was simply stressed by the uncertainty of probate. I gave him the benefit of the doubt. It was a dangerous miscalculation. Patricia was using the exact data Colin stole to accelerate the buyout process. She was sending our client list to her buyers to prove our future revenue streams. She was weaponizing my own financial architecture against me, built on the back of an ambitious man's fear. He made his choice. There is a fatal flaw in the psychology of greedy people. They are often too arrogant to double-check their own lies. On Monday morning, 4 days after Colin handed over the last batch of stolen financial data, he arrived at the office looking like he had not slept all weekend. His tailored suit was slightly wrinkled. His hands were shaking as he poured his morning coffee. I watched him from my office, sipping my own tea. I knew exactly what had happened. On Friday evening, Colin had received an encrypted email from the corporate real estate firm. They had sent it to him by mistake, assuming he was already officially acting as Patricia's liaison. It was the finalised operational restructuring plan, the same plan I had intercepted earlier. Colin had eagerly opened the document, expecting to see his name listed under the new executive management tier. Instead, He scrolled down to the personnel severance matrix. He found his own name. It was located in the third row. Next to his name, the corporate liquidator had left a small, brutally efficient note for Patricia Interim, CFO, poses redundancy risk. Terminate immediately upon asset transfer. Deny severance package due to breach of fiduciary duty. Patricia had never planned to promote him. She had planned to use his stolen data, seal the multi-million-dollar deal, and then throw him to the wolves. She was even going to use his act of corporate espionage as the legal justification to deny him a severance payout. He had betrayed me for absolutely nothing. At exactly 9 o'clock, Colin knocked on my door. He walked in, placed his laptop on my desk, and laid a heavy silver flash drive next to it. "Amanda," he said. His voice was completely broken. "I have done something terrible, and I am willing to face whatever legal consequences come next." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't yell. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the flash drive. "Tell me exactly what you gave her." "Colin." For the next hour, Colin confessed to everything. He detailed the country club meetings. He listed the specific proprietary files he had copied. Then he showed me the emails. He handed over every piece of correspondence between Patricia and the corporate buyers. He gave me the smoking gun that proved Patricia was actively negotiating the sale of an estate she did not legally own. "I will resign immediately," Colin whispered, staring at the floor. "I will sign a full confession for your lawyer." "Yes, you will," I replied softly. "You will go to Marcus's office right now. You will document everything. And then you will clear out your desk." I watched him walk out. He sealed his fate. When Patricia realised Colin was gone and her inside access to our financial servers had been abruptly, permanently severed, she changed her tactics. If she could not find a legal loophole to freeze the business from the inside, she decided to destroy its reputation from the outside. In Charleston, reputation is currency, and Patricia was a master of high society warfare. She could not attack the quality of our restoration work, so she decided to attack my morality. She began planting seeds of poison at every luncheon, charity gala, and country club dinner she attended. She leaned in close to the wives of the city's wealthiest property owners and whispered her fabricated tragedy. She claimed that I was a manipulative opportunist. She suggested that Jonathan's sudden decline in health was highly suspicious. But her most venomous lie was directed at my relationship with Marcus. Patricia started a rumour that I was having a prolonged, illicit affair with our trust attorney. She told anyone who would listen that Marcus and I had conspired to isolate Jonathan in his final months, forcing him to sign over the estate documents while he was heavily medicated. She even hired a private investigator to take photos of Marcus and me walking out of his law firm together, presenting the blurry images as proof of our secret rendezvous. The damage was swift. By Wednesday, my phone stopped ringing. A major historical preservation board, which had been on the verge of awarding us a massive multi-year contract to restore a downtown library, suddenly paused the negotiations. The board director called me, his tone awkwardly polite, stating they needed to wait until the family legal disputes were fully resolved before proceeding. Patricia was trying to starve the company. She wanted clients to abandon us so the revenue would drop, making it easier for her liquidators to justify a hostile takeover. She wanted me to panic. She wanted me to issue desperate public denials, dragging the company's name through the local tabloids. If you've ever had someone try to destroy your character because they couldn't control your boundaries, drop a 1 in the comments. I did not issue a statement. I did not call her friends to defend my honour. I sat in my office, reviewed the paused library contract, and smiled a cold, thin smile. Patricia was fighting a war of gossip. I was fighting a war of documented facts. Let her talk. I neutralised the library contract issue without a single dramatic public statement. I simply invited the board director to Marcus's office for a private, confidential meeting. We did not argue against the rumours of an affair. We just handed the director the official visitation logs from the law firm. Every single meeting Marcus and I ever had was fully documented. They were always attended by a senior paralegal, a notary public, and often Jonathan's primary care physician. We presented the sworn affidavits confirming that Jonathan was fully lucid, entirely involved, and deeply grateful for the legal structuring. The board director reviewed the pristine, undeniable paper trail. He apologised profusely for doubting our integrity. The multi-year restoration contract was officially signed and secured that same afternoon. Patricia, meanwhile, was entirely unaware that her sabotage had failed. She was too busy celebrating, confident that her character assassination had crippled my standing, and believing her corporate buyout was just days away from closing. Patricia booked the grand ballroom at the Charleston Heritage Club. She sent out embossed invitations to her closest allies, hosting a lavish New Beginnings dinner. I knew about the party because the catering invoice accidentally routed to our old shared family accounting software. She was spending $12,000 on champagne and hors d'oeuvres to celebrate stealing a company she did not legally own. But the most breathtaking display of her arrogance happened on Friday morning. I was standing near the front gates of our historic mansion, checking the intricate ironwork, when a sleek black car pulled up. Patricia stepped out. She did not look at me. She was accompanied by a man holding a clipboard and wearing white cotton appraisal gloves. She had brought a premier antique appraiser directly to my front door. The 18th century dining set is in excellent condition, I heard her say loudly to the appraiser, pointing toward my front windows, and I want a priority estimate on the vintage chandeliers. We will be clearing the property out by the end of the month. She was standing on my driveway, appraising the furniture I had picked out with Jonathan, planning her auction catalogue. I stood on the porch, my hands resting lightly in my pockets. I did not yell. I did not tell her to leave my property. I simply watched her point at my home, completely intoxicated by her own illusions of power. She thought the war was already over. She thought she had outmaneuvered me with gossip and aggressive lawyers. She had no idea she was dancing on a trapdoor. Enjoy the champagne. The restoration shop was completely dark when my headlights swept across the back alley. It was just past midnight. The heavy rain from the day of the funeral had finally stopped, leaving the air thick with the smell of wet asphalt and salt from the Charleston harbour. I unlocked the side door and deactivated the perimeter alarm. Tess was already waiting inside, sitting quietly on a stack of reclaimed lumber. She held a heavy steel pry bar in her hands. "Are you sure about this, Amanda?" she asked softly. Her voice echoed slightly in the vast, empty cavern of the workshop. "I'm absolutely sure," I replied. We walked together toward the back corner, near the massive industrial planer. The moonlight filtered through the high clear-story windows, casting long, geometric shadows across the floor. I looked down at the wide planks of century-old oak. To anyone else, it was just a beautifully laid hardwood floor. To me, it was a vault. Oak always keeps what paper might lose. When Patricia had whispered her venomous threat in my ear at the cemetery, I had smiled. It was a fleeting, almost imperceptible smile. Patricia had assumed it was the smile of a cold, unfeeling widow who was secretly thrilled to inherit an estate. She had rushed to judge me because her own heart was filled with greed. She did not know that my smile was a reaction to a memory. I had smiled because, in that exact moment, standing over my husband's grave, I finally understood the riddle he had left me. I realised that Jonathan had spent his final days ensuring Patricia could never touch the company, and he had hidden the proof in the very wood he loved. Tess knelt on the floor. She ran her fingers along the seam of a specific oak board. "This is the one," Tess whispered. "There are no finishing nails. It is just held by a tight friction joint. She wedged the flat edge of the steel pry bar into the microscopic gap between the boards. She applied a slow, steady pressure. The heavy oak plank groaned, protesting slightly against the surrounding wood, and then it popped loose. I knelt beside her and lifted the heavy board away. Beneath the subfloor, resting in a carefully constructed hollow cavity lined with protective velvet, sat a polished oak box. It was a humidor-style case, crafted with dovetail joints. I recognised Jonathan's handiwork immediately. He had built this box himself. My hands did not shake as I reached into the dark cavity and pulled the box out. It was remarkably heavy. I ran my thumb over the smooth lid. Patricia had spent weeks searching my home, snooping through my office and bribing my employees for corporate secrets. She had looked everywhere except beneath her own feet. I unlocked the brass latch. Inside the box rested a thick stack of legal documents, bound in a heavy blue folder, and a single silver USB drive. We found the truth. The next morning, I sat across from Marcus in his downtown law office. The heavy oak box sat open on his mahogany desk. The sunlight caught the edge of the silver USB drive, but Marcus's attention was entirely focused on the thick blue folder. He adjusted his reading glasses and flipped through the pages. The room was completely silent except for the crisp sound of heavy paper turning. Patricia had based her entire offensive strategy on the standard rules of probate. In her mind, an estate without a recent, publicly filed will was vulnerable. She believed that as Jonathan's mother, she could claim a biological entitlement to his assets, challenge my marital standing, and force a liquidation. She thought the courts would simply hand her the keys to a $4.5 million empire. She was about to get a devastating education in high-level estate law. Marcus looked up, removing his glasses. "Amanda, do you know what this is?" "Explain it to me," I said calmly. "This is an irrevocable living trust." Marcus explained, his voice carrying a note of profound respect. "Jonathan executed this 5 years ago. He did not just write a will. A will merely tells a probate judge how to distribute assets after death. A trust is an entirely different legal entity. He tapped the thick stack of paper. By signing this, Jonathan legally transferred the ownership of the restoration company, the historic mansion, and the waterfront property out of his own name and into the trust. He has not owned these assets for half a decade. The trust owns them." I absorbed the information quietly. "And what does that mean for Patricia?" "It means Patricia is fighting a ghost," Marcus said, a sharp smile forming on his lips. "When Jonathan died, these assets did not become part of his estate. Therefore, they are not subject to probate court. They bypass the legal system entirely. Patricia cannot challenge the inheritance because, legally speaking, there is absolutely nothing to inherit." It was a brilliant, bulletproof shield. Jonathan had removed the company from the battlefield before the war even began. He had appointed me as the sole acting trustee. I had complete, unmitigated control over the operation, distribution, and preservation of the assets. Patricia's high-priced probate lawyers were currently drafting aggressive petitions for properties that no longer existed on Jonathan's personal ledger. She had promised her corporate buyers a grand estate. She had promised to pay her massive debts with the proceeds. She had built her entire financial survival plan on a foundation of legal ignorance. I looked at the blue folder. I felt a deep, overwhelming sense of gratitude for my husband. He had used the law to build a fortress around the people he loved. The empire was secure. Marcus was not finished. He turned to the second section of the blue folder, his eyebrows raised slightly as he read the secondary addendums Jonathan had attached to the trust. "It gets worse for her," Marcus murmured, almost in disbelief. Jonathan did not just protect the physical asset, he protected the intellectual property. The patents, I said. Exactly. Marcus nodded. The patents for the specialised wood preservation techniques, the chemical compounds, and the operational software you designed, Jonathan legally segregated them. The trust owns the buildings and the heavy machinery, but you, Amanda, hold the patents personally. You own the actual technology. This was the architecture of a corporate defence mechanism known as a poison pill. Patricia had presented a spreadsheet to her corporate liquidators, valuing the company at $4.5 million. But that valuation was based on our status as an operational industry leader. It was based on our exclusive contracts and our proprietary technology. There is a licensing clause here, Marcus explained, pointing to a highlighted paragraph. The trust is granted a free license to use your patents as long as you remain the controlling trustee. However, in the event of a hostile change of control or an involuntary liquidation attempt, your personal license is immediately and automatically revoked. The brilliance of the structure was breathtaking. Even if Patricia somehow managed to perform a legal miracle and break the irrevocable trust, even if a corrupt judge handed her the keys to the buildings, she would gain absolutely nothing of value. Without my patents, the corporate buyers could not execute any of the highly profitable restoration contracts. Without my software, the operational logistics would collapse overnight. If Patricia sold the company against my will, the buyers would not be acquiring a $4.5 million empire. They would be acquiring a dusty warehouse, some rusty table saws, and an empty shell worth perhaps $1.3 million in physical scrap. It would not even be enough to cover the massive debts Patricia owed to her creditors. Jonathan had ensured that if anyone tried to steal the company from me, the company would instantly become worthless in their hands. If you love seeing a carefully laid trap snap shut on a toxic person, stay with me. The hearing is next. I leaned back in the leather chair. I thought about Patricia measuring my windows and planning her victory party. I did not feel the need to call her. I did not feel the need to brag. I simply told Marcus to prepare the documents for the corporate buyers. The trap was set. On Tuesday morning, the air in Charleston was crisp and clear. I was sitting at the massive kitchen island inside the historic mansion, reviewing a quarterly tax report, when a heavy black SUV pulled into my circular driveway. I checked the security cameras on my tablet. Patricia stepped out of the passenger side. She was not alone. She was accompanied by a slickly dressed real estate broker and a man wearing a utility belt. She had brought a locksmith. Patricia marched up the front steps with the arrogant stride of a conquering general. She did not knock. She simply gestured for the locksmith to approach the heavy brass door handle. She was staging a hostile physical takeover, operating under the delusion that possession was 9/10 of the law. I did not panic. I did not run to the door and scream. I simply picked up a thin, pristine manila folder from the counter, walked to the front door, and pulled it open just as the locksmith raised his drill. Patricia flinched, stepping back slightly. She quickly recovered her composure, lifting her chin. "Amanda," Patricia said, her voice sharp and commanding. "I told you I required access by Friday. Your refusal to cooperate has forced my hand. This broker is here to take the interior listing photos, and the locks are being changed today. You have 48 hours to remove your personal clothing." The broker gave me an awkward, apologetic smile. The locksmith looked down at his boots. I did not look at Patricia. I looked directly at the broker. "My name is Amanda Harper," I said, my voice completely level and conversational. "I am the sole acting trustee of the Harper Legacy Trust. This property is fully protected under a legally binding irrevocable trust. It is not, and has never been part of a probate estate." The broker's smile vanished. He took a hesitant step backward. I opened the manila folder. I handed the broker a certified copy of the trust certificate. Then I handed him a formal cease and desist order drafted by Marcus. Furthermore, I continued, handing a copy of the civil liability warning to the locksmith, any attempt to alter, drill, or bypass the security of this property will be treated as criminal breaking and entering. Any professional assisting in that effort will be named as a co-defendant in a civil lawsuit for tortious interference and trespassing. The locksmith dropped his drill back into his tool belt immediately. I'm out. I don't get involved in legal disputes. He turned and walked straight back to his van. The broker looked at the trust certificate in his hands. His face turned pale. Mrs. Harper, he stammered, looking at Patricia. You explicitly stated you had clear title to this property. I cannot photograph a contested trust asset. He practically threw the document back at Patricia and hurried toward his car. Patricia was left standing on the vast, sweeping porch. The men she had hired to intimidate me had evaporated in less than 60 seconds. I looked at her flushed, furious face. I did not raise my voice. I did not insult her. I simply closed the heavy brass door until the latch clicked. She stood entirely alone. The physical humiliation on my front porch was only the beginning of Patricia's collapse. While she was busy trying to drill my locks, Marcus was executing the second phase of our strategy. Patricia had been negotiating with a massive, ruthless commercial real estate group. These corporate liquidators did not care about family drama. They cared about risk, liability, and guaranteed returns. Patricia had promised them a clean, unencumbered acquisition of our $4.5 million property. At exactly 10 o'clock that morning, Marcus sent a heavy, certified legal packet directly to the general counsel of the real estate group. The packet did not contain emotional pleas. It contained hard, undeniable data. Marcus provided them with the certified irrevocable trust documents, proving Patricia possessed absolutely no legal authority to sell the land. He included the patent registration numbers, demonstrating that the operational technology, the actual value of the business, would instantly self-destruct the moment a hostile takeover occurred. But the final document was the most devastating. Years ago, Jonathan and I had filed a strict conservation easement with the Charleston Historical Society. It legally bound the waterfront property and the mansion. The easement explicitly prohibited tearing down the structures, dividing the acreage, or building modern commercial condominiums. The land was permanently locked into its historical footprint. Patricia had promised the corporate buyers a blank canvas for a luxury resort. She had lied to them. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, Marcus called me. I put him on speakerphone in my office. The corporate buyers just pulled out, Marcus said, a distinct note of satisfaction in his voice. They didn't just cancel the negotiations, Amanda. They are absolutely furious. Did they contact Patricia? I asked quietly. They sent her a formal notice of termination. Marcus confirmed. And they copied my office. They are threatening to sue her for fraudulent misrepresentation. She signed preliminary consulting agreements claiming she had clear title to the estate. She wasted tens of thousands of dollars of their legal and surveying time. They are demanding immediate compensation. Patricia had tried to play a high-stakes corporate game without understanding the rules. She had treated the company like a simple checking account she could simply withdraw cash from. Now, the very sharks she had invited into the water were turning around to bite her. She had no buyers. She had no authority. She had no access to the property. And most importantly, she still had her own crippling, massive debts waiting for her at home. Her creditors had been holding off because she promised them a massive windfall from the sale of her son's legacy. Now, that windfall was officially dead. The corporate money had vanished. I looked out at the shop floor. Tess was laughing with one of the apprentices, her son's medical care fully secured. The heavy machinery was humming, completely safe from the auction block. I felt a deep, steady peace settling into the room. Her leverage was gone. Desperation is a dangerous catalyst. When Patricia realised her corporate buyers had vanished and her multi-million-dollar payday had evaporated, she stopped caring about appearances. She no longer wanted to simply win the estate. She wanted to punish me. On Thursday morning, Marcus called me with an urgent update. Patricia's legal team had filed an emergency injunction with the probate court. They are requesting an immediate temporary freeze on all corporate operating accounts, Marcus explained, his tone tight. Her lawyers are arguing that because you are both the primary beneficiary and the acting trustee, there is an inherent conflict of interest. They are claiming you might liquidate assets and flee before the court can determine the validity of the trust. The legal argument was flimsy, but emergency injunctions are often granted simply to preserve the status quo until a formal hearing. What does the freeze cover, I asked, looking out through my office glass. Everything, Marcus said quietly. Payroll, vendor payments, and the corporate health insurance premiums. The insurance payment is due in 48 hours. Amanda, if the accounts are frozen, the policy lapses. Patricia knew exactly what she was doing. She remembered the corporate spreadsheet. She remembered Tess's son, Sam, and his chronic illness. She was intentionally using the livelihood and medical security of 34 innocent families as financial hostages. She believed that if she squeezed the oxygen out of the company, I would fold. She thought I would surrender the trust to save my employees. I looked at Tess, who was currently operating a heavy sander on the shop floor. She had no idea her son's medical lifeline was being threatened again. I did not panic. I simply opened the bottom drawer of my desk and pulled out the private ledger I had established weeks ago. Let her have the injunction, I told Marcus, my voice completely steady. Amanda, if the insurance lapses... It won't, I interrupted gently. When she tried to bribe Tess, I saw this coming. I transferred enough liquid capital from my private, premarital savings into a secure, off-book escrow account. It is legally separated from the trust and the corporate entity. It covers payroll and premium insurance for the next 90 days. Marcus was silent on the other end of the line for a long time. When he finally spoke, I could hear the deep respect in his voice. You outflanked her before she even drafted the motion. File our response, I instructed. Tell the court we welcome a full hearing on the validity of the trust. Let's finish this. Patricia wanted a war of attrition. She had no idea she was laying siege to a fully provisioned fortress. I watched Tess laugh at something a co-worker said, completely protected from the storm. We were ready. The Charleston County Probate Court was an intimidating room of dark mahogany and high ceilings. Patricia arrived, wearing a tailored black suit, her chin tilted upward, flanked by 2 expensive attorneys. She looked like a woman attending a coronation. I sat quietly next to Marcus. I wore a simple navy dress. I had not brought an army of lawyers. I had only brought the truth. The judge, a stern woman with 20 years on the bench, opened the thick file. Patricia's lead attorney stood immediately, launching into a passionate, rehearsed speech about family bloodlines, grief, and the supposed manipulation of a dying man. He argued that the irrevocable trust was a sham designed to enrich a greedy widow. When he finished, the judge looked at Marcus. Mr. Marcus, your client is accused of managing a trust with a severe conflict of interest. How do you respond? Marcus stood up slowly. Your Honour, the Harper Legacy Trust was structured with an independent corporate co-trustee and an annual third-party audit requirement. Furthermore, I have submitted the certified financial logs. Mrs. Harper has not drawn a single unapproved dollar from the corporate accounts. Her management has been flawless. The judge reviewed the logs, nodding slowly. Then she turned her attention directly to Patricia. "Mrs. Harper," the judge said, her voice echoing in the large room. "Your injunction claims you are stepping in to protect the legacy of this company and its workforce. You stated in your filing that the current management is detrimental to the employees." Patricia stood up, clasping her hands. "Yes, Your Honour, my son built that company. I am simply trying to save it." The judge adjusted her glasses. "Interesting. Because I have a sworn affidavit from your former interim financial director. It includes a liquidation matrix you personally approved. It indicates your intention to terminate all 34 employees immediately upon gaining control." Patricia's face lost a fraction of its colour. She glanced at her attorney, who looked suddenly uncomfortable. "If you are so deeply invested in these workers, Mrs. Harper," the judge continued, her tone turning dangerously cold, "perhaps you can name 5 of them for the court right now." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. You could hear the ticking of the wall clock. Patricia opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She looked at the floor. She looked at the ceiling. Finally, she grasped for a memory. There is the foreman, and the carpenter, the woman with the sick kid." Someone in the gallery let out a low, audible gasp of disgust. The judge stared at Patricia for a long, agonizing moment. "The carpenter with the sick kid," the judge repeated, her voice dripping with quiet contempt. "Her name is Tess. I know this because her medical insurance was almost cancelled by your emergency motion." Patricia slowly sank back into her chair. Her grand illusion of being a caring matriarch had just shattered in open court. She was exposed not just as a fraud, but as someone who viewed human beings as disposable liabilities. The room knew the truth, just when it seemed the judge was prepared to dismiss the case entirely. Patricia's lead attorney played his final desperate card. "Your Honour," the lawyer said quickly, pulling a new file from his briefcase, "we concede the liquidation matrix looks unfavourable, but it is irrelevant if the trust itself is legally invalid. I present a retroactive psychological evaluation conducted by Dr. Aris Thorne. It concludes that due to the heavy narcotic pain medication Jonathan Harper was prescribed, he lacked the legal cognitive capacity to execute a binding trust 5 years ago." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Patricia sat up straighter. She had purchased a medical opinion to retroactively declare her own son mentally incompetent. It was a vicious, calculating strike. If Jonathan lacked capacity, the trust was void. The assets would revert to probate. The judge frowned, taking the document. For a brief second, the air in the room felt dangerously thin. I did not flinch. I did not look at Marcus in a panic. We had anticipated this exact manoeuvre. I kept my hands folded quietly in my lap. Marcus stood up. "Your Honour, may I ask opposing counsel a single question regarding this medical evaluation?" The judge nodded. "Proceed." Marcus looked directly at Patricia's lawyer. "Counsellor, how many times did Dr. Thorne personally examine Jonathan Harper before writing this definitive evaluation?" The lawyer adjusted his tie, his confidence wavering. "Doctor, Thorne conducted a thorough review of the medical charts and prescription logs provided by my client. So, the answer is 0. Marcus stated clearly, he never met the patient. He never spoke to him. He simply reviewed a list of painkillers." Marcus walked to the evidence table and picked up a laptop. "Your Honour, when Jonathan Harper executed this trust, he knew his mother would attempt this exact tactic. That is why the signing did not just happen on paper." Marcus connected the laptop to the courtroom monitor. He clicked a file. "He The screen flickered to life. There was Jonathan, sitting in Marcus's office 5 years ago. He looked thin, but his eyes were bright and completely focused. 3 distinct, practicing neurologists were seated in the room with him. "My name is Jonathan Harper." My husband's recorded voice echoed through the silent courtroom. "I am executing this irrevocable trust of my own free will. I am doing this because my mother, Patricia Harper, has explicitly stated her intention to dismantle this company and fire the workers I consider family." Jonathan looked directly into the camera lens. "I'm not doing this because Amanda asked me to. I'm doing this because Amanda spent 15 years begging me to keep the peace with a mother who only loves control." The video continued, showing the 3 doctors confirming his lucidity on the record. It was an absolute, devastating checkmate. I looked at Patricia. Her face was ashen. Her hands trembled uncontrollably. She had tried to rewrite history, but Jonathan's voice had reached across time to protect me one last time. The hammer fell. The judge did not deliberate for long. She dismissed Patricia's injunction with prejudice, validated the irrevocable trust, and permanently barred Patricia from contesting the estate. When the gavel struck the sounding block, there was no loud cheering. There was only the profound, heavy relief of a nightmare finally ending. Patricia did not look at me. She gathered her expensive coat and walked out of the courtroom, her head bowed, her 2 attorneys trailing behind her in silence. Marcus packed his briefcase and turned to me. "Amanda, we won, but we can take this further." I looked at him, waiting. "She committed fraud when she signed those preliminary contracts with the real estate firm," Marcus explained quietly. "She attempted to tortiously interfere with your business operations. She actively tried to cancel the health insurance of a minor. We can file a massive civil suit. We can sue her for legal fees, emotional distress, and corporate damages. We can bankrupt her completely." It was an alluring proposition. I had the power to crush the woman who had made me feel invisible for 15 years. I could take her heavily mortgaged house. I could humiliate her in the press. I could become exactly like her. I looked out the courtroom window at the Charleston skyline. "No," I said smoothly. Marcus blinked, surprised. "You want to let her walk away?" "I am not letting her walk away. I am letting her go." I corrected him. "Draft a binding settlement. She drops any future rights to appeal. She ceases all contact with our employees and our clients. She issues a formal written retraction of the rumours she spread to the historical board. If she signs it, I will not pursue civil damages." I paused, ensuring my voice was absolute. "And she pays her own legal fees. Every single dime." Marcus smiled slowly, finally understanding the depth of the strategy. Suing Patricia would mean staying tethered to her for years in a bitter, toxic court battle. It would mean allowing her to consume more of my time and energy by forcing her to sign a comprehensive surrender. I was establishing an impenetrable boundary. She would be left to face her creditors, her failed social standing, and her massive legal bills entirely alone, without the crutch of a prolonged victim narrative. I was not choosing forgiveness. I was choosing freedom. I was cutting the infected branch off the family tree so the rest of us could finally grow in the sunlight. I chose peace. A week after the court ruling, the dust had finally settled. The rumours in Charleston had died down, replaced by a quiet, collective respect for the way the company had weathered the storm. I sat in Marcus's office for one final piece of administrative business. There was a specific provision in the trust that Jonathan had mandated to be executed only after all legal disputes were definitively resolved. Marcus slid a sealed envelope across the desk. It contained a certified bank check and a handwritten letter. "This is the distribution for Patricia," Marcus said. I looked at the check. It was drafted for exactly $100,000. Not a penny more, not a penny less. Patricia had spent Jonathan's entire adult life reminding him of the $100,000 she had supposedly sacrificed for him. She had used that number as a weapon of guilt, a tool to force his compliance and excuse her disrespect toward me. Jonathan had kept every ledger, knowing her claim was vastly inflated. Yet, he chose to pay it in full. I opened the copy of the letter Jonathan had instructed Marcus to mail along with the check. Mother, the letter began, you have often reminded me that I owe you $100,000 for my start in life. Enclosed is the full repayment of that debt. From this day forward, you no longer possess the right to use that debt to claim ownership over my life, my wife, or the labour of the people who built my company. It was a brilliant clinical severance. He did not leave her an inheritance. He paid a designated invoice. He legally and morally closed out her account. Then, Marcus handed me a second piece of paper. He asked me to give this to you. Only you. I unfolded the delicate paper. It was written in Jonathan's careful script. My dearest Amanda. It read, I am so deeply sorry. For 15 years, I asked you to absorb the cruelty of a woman I was too cowardly to confront. I asked you to be small so I wouldn't have to fight. You built this company with me, but you protected my soul entirely on your own. The trust is not just a shield against her. It is my final apology to you. You are the architect of our survival. Keep building. I sat in the quiet office, tracing the ink of his signature. For the first time since his funeral, a single, silent tear fell onto the mahogany desk. It was not a tear of grief. It was the profound release of a heavy chain I had carried for over a decade. The debt was paid. 9 months later, the coastal winter had faded into a bright, blooming spring. The restoration shop was alive with a vibrant, renewed energy. The heavy scent of fresh-cut oak and linseed oil filled the massive warehouse. We had just secured 2 more major contracts with the Historical Society, cementing our reputation as the premier preservation firm in the state. I walked across the shop floor, holding a cup of hot coffee. Nobody lowered their eyes when I walked past. The craftsmen greeted me with warm smiles and updates on their projects. The invisible tension that had plagued the building during Patricia's shadow campaign was completely eradicated. I stopped by the main finishing station. Tess was standing there, reviewing a blueprint with a junior apprentice. She was no longer just a carpenter. I had promoted her to the floor manager of the finishing department. How is the intricate moulding coming along? I asked. Tess looked up, her face glowing with genuine happiness. We are 2 days ahead of schedule, and the new varnishing technique is flawless. And how is Sam? I asked softly. Tess's smile widened. His last scan was totally clear. The new medication is working perfectly. He actually played a full game of soccer this weekend. Hearing that made every stressful hour in the courtroom entirely worth it. The company was thriving, but more importantly, the people inside it were safe. Later that afternoon, I stood in the newly renovated wing of our facility. We were hosting a small, private reception. I stood at the podium and looked out at the faces of my team, local community leaders, and Marcus. I cut the red ribbon stretched across the double doors of our new classroom. Welcome, I said clearly, to the Jonathan and Amanda Harper Foundation for Craftsmanship. We had used the increased profits to open a fully funded apprenticeship program specifically designed for single mothers and vulnerable women in the Charleston area. We were teaching them high-level carpentry, architectural restoration, and financial literacy. We were not just restoring old houses anymore. We were restoring lives. Patricia had tried to tell the world that I was a parasite who only knew how to take. My response was to build an institution that only knew how to give. We were giving women the tools, the skills, and the quiet dignity to build their own fortresses, ensuring they would never have to depend on the conditional mercy of toxic people. The roots were strong. I rarely thought about Patricia anymore. Through the tight-knit social circles of Charleston, I occasionally heard whispers of her rapid decline. Without the millions she had promised her creditors, her financial illusions had violently collapsed. Her historic mansion was foreclosed on by the bank. She was forced to quietly move into a small, rented apartment on the outskirts of the city. The society friends she had desperately tried to impress quickly abandoned her once the truth of her courtroom humiliation and her attempt to cancel an employee's medical insurance became public knowledge. She was a woman who had worshipped the superficial. And in the end, she was left with nothing of substance. I did not gloat. I did not drive past her new apartment. Her punishment was not inflicted by me. It was simply the natural consequence of her own choices. I sat on the wide, wraparound balcony of my home, holding a warm mug of tea. The sun was setting over the harbour, painting the sky in deep shades of gold and violet. The old oak trees swayed gently in the coastal breeze. I thought about the journey from that rainy cemetery to this peaceful balcony. I had learned a profound truth about survival and success. Legacy isn't what you inherit, it's what you protect. It is not the money or the name on a deed that matters. It is the dignity with which you conduct yourself when someone tries to take it all away. It is the quiet, unwavering resolve to shield the people who depend on you. I had faced a woman who wanted to tear my world apart, and I had defeated her simply by knowing the law, trusting my team, and refusing to surrender my peace. I took a slow, deep breath. The air was clean. The house was quiet. The empire was secure. Do you think Amanda should have let Patricia keep the $100,000, or did she deserve to leave with absolutely nothing? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, please share it. I'll see you in the next one. The door clicked shut.